Hey Gwen, did you see the video I sent you last night? The one with the puppy stuck in a tiny box.
You mean the one where it tries to wiggle out for 5 minutes and then just gives up? I laughed so hard I almost cried.
Me too, it was so hilarious. Speaking of crying, do you remember the last time you cried for real? Not over a funny video.
Hmm. I do actually. It was a few weeks ago while watching a reunion clip. You know, the soldier returning home to surprise his family.
Oh, that gets me every time. But wait a minute, Gwen. Isn't crying kind of a sign of weakness? You know, like people always say?
Good question. Is it really? Let's dive into that today. Welcome to today's episode of Podcast and Chill on the Learn English podcast channel. I'm Gwen.
And I'm Leo. Today we're discussing a very popular topic nowadays. Stop crying. Crying is losing. Are tears really something to be ashamed of, or do they tell a deeper story? Let's find out.
Oh, and here's a little reminder for our listeners. In today's episode, we've prepared a free PDF with tips and to help you on your journey. Now let's get into it.
All right, Gwen. Let's start with the basics. Why do we cry in the first place?
Great question, Leo. Crying is actually the body's natural reaction to strong emotions. It's like our brain's way of saying, "This is too much, let's release some pressure."
Like letting steam out of a kettle?
Exactly. And crying isn't just about being sad. We cry when we're really happy, like at weddings or when we receive good news. We cry when we're in pain or even when we're super stressed. Crying can happen when we feel anything strongly.
But still, people often say, stop crying, be strong. Why do you think that is?
Good point. That brings us to our second idea. Is crying really a sign of weakness? What do you think, Leo?
Hmm, I'd say a lot of it comes from society, especially for men. We're taught from a young age that crying makes you look weak or less manly.
Yes, exactly. It's such a harmful message, though. Think about it. If you're crying, it's because you're brave enough to face your feelings, not run away from them. You're not trying to hide from your emotions.
You're right. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm feeling really stressed right now.
And if we keep those feelings all locked inside us, they can grow bigger. They might cause more problems later on. It's like trying to hold in a balloon that's getting bigger and bigger. Finally, it's going to pop. Letting those feelings out, even if it's through crying, can help us feel better. It also makes it easier to deal with things.
Crying is like letting air out of that balloon. It feels much better and doesn't explode.
Absolutely. So, listeners, next time someone tells you to stop crying, think about this. Tears don't make you weak, they make you human. They show that you care deeply and that you're alive.
Love that, Gwen. All right, we've talked about why people cry and whether it's seen as weak. Let's go in a different direction. What about the benefits of crying? Does crying actually help us?
Absolutely, Leo. Crying has some surprising benefits. First, let's talk about stress relief. It's when our body says, let's flush this out and feel lighter.
That makes sense. I've definitely felt better after a good cry, like a weight is lifted. What else?
Another benefit is improved mood. Crying can bring a sense of relief, almost like resetting your emotions. You know that feeling when the tears stop and suddenly everything feels a bit clearer?
Totally. It's like the storm passes and there's calmness afterward. But what about the social side of crying? Isn't it kind of awkward to cry in front of others?
It can feel that way, but actually, crying helps with social bonding. When you cry in front of someone who listens and cares, it builds trust and connection. It's a way of saying, hey, I'm being real with you.
Wow. So crying isn't just about you, it's also about strengthening relationships.
Exactly, Leo. So, listeners, the next time you feel tears coming, remember this. Crying helps your body, your mind, and even your connections with others. It's not a sign of losing, it's a step toward healing.
Well said, Gwen. Crying is more than just an emotional response. It's a powerful tool for relief and connection. Let's all embrace it more often. All right, now let's bring out some useful phrases in today's episode for our listeners. Weakness, a lack of strength or power. a fault or flaw. Example, he believed that expressing his emotions was a sign of weakness and tried to hold them inside.
Release pressure. To let out stress or tension that are locked inside. Example, after a hard day, talking to a friend helps me release pressure and feel calm.
Social bonding, connecting and building a good relationship with others. Example, being honest with friends is a great way to create social bonding.
Build trust. To create strong belief or confidence in someone. Example, when you keep your promises, you build trust with your friends.
Strengthening relationships, making relationships stronger and better. Example, spending time with family during holidays is important for strengthening relationships.
Here are some useful questions for our listeners. Question 1. Why do we cry when we feel strong emotions? Crying helps release strong feelings like stress, pain, or even happiness. It's the body's way of saying, let's let it out.
Question 2. How can crying help build better relationships? Crying can bring people closer together. When you cry in front of someone who listens and cares, it helps build trust and connection. Gwen, we've talked about why people cry and the benefits it can bring. But here's something to think about. Can crying actually show strength?
Absolutely, Leo. Many people think crying is weak, but in reality, it's the opposite. It takes courage to let others see your emotions and say, this is how I feel.
That's true. It's not easy to be that open, especially when society often tells us to hide our feelings.
For example, some famous leaders and celebrities have shown their strength through tears. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has been seen crying in public while mentioning tragedies in her country, like the Christchurch mosque attacks. Her tears showed her empathy and made people feel she truly cared.
And remember when athletes cry after winning a big game or losing one? It shows they truly care about what they do. Their tears inspire others to care too.
Yes, crying isn't a weakness. It's a way to connect with others and show you're human.
But Gwen, can there be a time when crying becomes too much?
That's a great question, Leo. Crying is natural and healthy, but if someone is crying very often or for no clear reason, it could mean something deeper is going on.
Like what?
It might be a sign of depression or anxiety. These are struggles that can make people feel upset, sad, or stressed all the time. And sometimes they cry because they don't know how else to cope with those feelings. So, it's more than just feeling sad for a day or two.
Exactly.
If someone finds it hard to stop crying or manage their emotions, they should talk to someone they trust. This could be a friend, a family member, or even a counselor.
That makes sense. It's like asking for help when your car isn't working right. Sometimes you just need a mechanic for your emotions.
Perfect example, Leo. Now let's talk about how to support someone who's crying. What do you usually do if a friend starts crying?
Hmm, I think I'd tell them, don't cry. It'll be okay.
That's kind, but there's a better way to help. First, sit with them and listen. Don't rush to judge or fix things right away. Just let them talk if they want to.
So just being there can make a big difference?
Absolutely. Then offer comfort, maybe a kind word or a hug if they're okay with it. And instead of guessing what they need, ask them. You could say, how can I help you right now?
That sounds simple but powerful. Just showing you care means so much.
Exactly. So, listeners, remember, crying is a part of being human. But if it feels like too much, don't hesitate to ask for help. And if someone you care about is crying, be there for them with kindness and patience.
Well said, Gwen. A little empathy can go a long way. Let's all practice that in our own lives. Let's review some useful phrases in today's episode. Hide your feelings. To not show how you feel to others. Molly doesn't want her friends to worry, so she hides her feelings and smiled.
Cope with, to deal with something difficult. After losing his job, my brother found it hard to cope with the stress.
Reach out to someone to ask for help or support. If you ever feel lonely, don't be afraid to reach out to someone you trust.
Rush to judge. To quickly form an opinion without thinking carefully. Before knowing the whole story, Lily rushed to judge her sister unfairly.
Talk it out. To express thoughts or feelings by talking about them. Example: sometimes you just need to talk it out to feel better. Now let's move on to some questions to help you understand today's topic. Question 1. Why do some people think crying shows strength? Crying shows strength because you must be brave enough to express your emotions and be open with others, even when society tells us to hide our feelings.
Question 2. What should you do if a friend starts crying? In my opinion, I would sit with them, listen, and offer comfort. I would ask them, "How can I help you right now?" to show you care. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these questions, so feel free to share them with us in the comments.
All right, that's it for today's episode of Podcast and Chill. Keep it in mind that crying is not a failure. It's just your body and mind healing. It's okay to feel and let your tears flow.
Embrace your emotions and know that crying is a natural part of being human. If you ever need to cry, don't hold back. It's a way to feel better.
Thank you so much for listening. We believe in you, and we'll see you in the next episode of Podcast and Chill.
Keep being kind to yourself and take care.